Welcome everyone to this community panel discussion on poverty in the city of St. Paul. My name is Jane Turk. I work in the Center for Teaching and Learning here, and I am the coordinator of the Common Read program. And as I said at the last panel, I'd like to welcome the members of my class, Kids in America, Growing Up and Coming of Age with Mass Media. One of the first year seminar class I teach this year. So welcome to that first year seminar. Welcome to all of you. I hope this will be a really interesting and engaging conversation, and will provide you ways to make some connections between the commitment to community address last week and the context about people living in poverty right here in St. Paul. So we're going to start off the panel with some introductions. So all the way to your right. Yes. We have Nina Eagin, who is a research associate at the Wilder Foundation. Next to her, Mary Vanderwert, who is a member of the St. Paul Schools School Board. Next to her is Tikki Brown, the executive director of the Office of Economic Opportunity of the Department of Human Services for the state of Minnesota. And right to my left here, Bao Vang, president and CEO of the Hmong American Partnership. So, there go introduction. I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves a bit more in the context of their work and how their work connects back to this topic of poverty in St. Paul. So we'll start off with Nina. So each of the panelists will describe how does their work connect with this conversation about people living in poverty in St. Paul.
Great. Welcome. How are you guys doing today?
Pretty good.
You doing okay? Oh, I should use this, huh? So as she said, my name is Nina Eagin. I'm with the Wilder Foundation, specifically with the research department. And I work mainly on two projects, Minnesota Compass, which is an indicators project that tracks trends that are happening in Minnesota, one of which is poverty. And the other project I work on is the Promised Neighborhood initiative that happens in St. Paul. It's a geographic area where additional resources and money is being spent to try to reduce poverty and increase quality of life for all those who live there. So I handed out those sheets. That's the main handout that we give out about Minnesota Compass every year. It shows all the different kind of key measures that we track. There's more information on our website that you can look at. Yeah. So I think that's where I'll go for here.
And we can share websites or other resources. We can share them with the vice and faculty after the panel. Great.
Hi everybody, I'm Mary Vanderwert, and as Jane said, I serve on the St. Paul Public Schools School Board. I've just been there 10 months. It's been quite an adventure. If you want to talk about politics, I got all kinds of new insights. But that's it. I actually have two full-time jobs. I'm also Minnesota's Tooth Fairy. I work for the National Children's Oral Health Foundation in an effort to prevent and dental disease in children. So when you talk about poverty, it connects to both of those paid jobs. The St. Paul School Board is the second largest school district in the state. We have about 38,000 children, and 75% of those kids are eligible for free and reduced lunch. We live in Ramsey County, where 25% of our kids are living in poverty, which is, one of the highest percentages in the state. And a school district with those kinds of demographics have all kinds of challenges. They come with wanting all our kids to achieve and trying to strategize on how we do that with limited resources, very limited resources. We can talk about that too. Poverty brings mental health issues and a lot of trauma for our kids, which requires a different approach to education, and I think we're struggling with that. Plus, we are also 75% children who come from communities of color. And so the district has been working on what equity means and what does equity in education mean for our kids and what does it mean for us and how we interact with kids and families. And so it's an exciting time in the schools. We have to choose a new superintendent, and continue to make progress on all of those other issues. So a challenge, we'll take any of your good ideas you can give us. Any involvement you want, we'll take. Also around children's oral health, I didn't know this when I started this position, but dental disease is the #1 chronic illness for kids in this country. And it is the reason they miss school, it's the reason they go to emergency rooms. And for many of our kids living in poverty, access is a serious issue. They don't get dental care. And so there's a lot of education that needs to be done around preventing, with parents to prevent dental disease. But we also need to sort of raise awareness in our state about the critical nature of children's teeth. And it impacts everything in their lives. I also do a fair number of volunteer things around homelessness in particular. I do fundraising and work with families. In fact, I just came from the Family Place, which is the day shelter for families in Ramsey County, and they gave me some messages I'll share later. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation, Jane.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. Good. So I work for the Department of Human Services, Office of Economic Opportunity. You can always tell government employees when we start talking really long explanations of what we do, so I'll try not to do that, but it's all of our language is long and complex. So the broad areas that I cover in my work is work with community action agencies, with homeless shelters, with food and nutrition programs, and that includes work with food shelves, with SNAP outreach, which is formerly known as food stamps or food support, and also early childhood facilities bonding, which means that it's funding that goes to schools or cities to help put together buildings for maybe early Head Start or Head Start, so that there's places and locations for children to actually learn and be in a safe place. So in terms of Ramsey County, I rarely think of my work, actually, I guess you didn't say Ramsey County, you said the city. I really think of my work in terms of the city. I really think of my work really in terms of statewide, because I work for the state, or regions, or counties, so I think of Ramsey County. But if I narrow my focus really in terms of the work that we do, in terms of all the programs that I mentioned, what that means is really Community Action Partnership of Ramsey, Washington is a program that's in Ramsey County, some of the food shelves and homeless shelters that are in Ramsey County, and then also our SNAP outreach agencies that are in Ramsey County as well. And all the work that I do is really focused on community-based organizations that are helping to alleviate poverty. And so we're a little bit unique within the Department of Human Services, is that I don't really work with counties per se, but really with community organizations that really are working on the ground with people trying to impact their lives.
Well, hello everyone. As Jane introduced earlier, my name is Bao Vang, and I'm the President and CEO of the Hmong American Partnership. So a little bit about our organization. We started over 20 years ago by some of our pioneers at that time who has the aspiration of moving the Hmong community from poverty to self-sufficiency. Over the years, our organization has really extended beyond our community in terms of serving clients. And so today we have evolved from being an ethnic-specific organization to a community-based organization. We speak over 20 different languages, and we operate in 6 centers. So we are the largest Hmong nonprofit organization in the country. We're also the largest refugee-led and Asian-led organization in the state of Minnesota. And so I often like to kind of talk about our work in terms of 3 really critical, or a group of stakeholders that we serve. One is that we will always have an expertise in terms of serving the Hmong community locally, nationally, and internationally. The second expertise that we have is always, our refugee arm, or serving refugee or emerging new communities. So within the emerging new communities, we serve Korean, Koreanese, Burmese, Bhutanese, Somalis, you name it. And then we also have a expertise in serving the Southeast Asian community here in Minnesota. I have to say that Minnesota, we can say that we are very proud to be the largest Hmong in terms of Southeast Asian umbrella. And so Of course, anywhere in the country, we are probably very few in terms of the Asian percentage. But here in Minnesota, you can say we are the largest population. So who can guess the second largest Asian group here in Minnesota? Yeah.
In California?
California is the first largest Hmong population state. Minnesota is the second largest Hmong population state. So here in Minnesota, East Indian or South Indian comprise the second largest Asian population. And that wasn't until recently when we started having a lot of H-1B visa, you know. And so the work that we do is really to lift
What
the...
is an H-1B visa?
Gee, I know she's gonna be careful about
our students.
So those are working visas, you know, for talent that the United States, you know, lacks or are recruiting for. And so we have a lot of tremendous growth within the last 10 years with a, you know, South Asian population here. And so I often like to look at poverty from the lens of not only someone who's gone through poverty myself, but really looking at how do we do things differently so that it will produce a different result than how traditional institutions or perceptions have been. And so when we think about our work, is really think about the kind of impact that we want to make in the community, the kind of impact that speaks to our direct experience and data and trends from within our community, as opposed to trends and data that, you know, is broader, that sometimes the real issue gets missed or the real data gets missed. And so we pride ourselves in really looking at how do we help the people in our community embrace the strength of their culture while achieving their potential. So really honoring where they come from, honoring their legacy, their history, you know, honoring the fact that we all have a lot of challenges and barriers. We come from, you know, similarly, you know, the refugees come from war-torn country. So we have post-war trauma. You know, there's a lot of issues and challenges that we have gone through as Hmong Americans, and then how do we really use that experience, you know, to also help other emerging new communities overcome barriers and challenges that we have gone through. And so we do this by really, you know, catering to the different ethnic groups that we serve, and really looking at how do we improve their literacy skills through adult basic education. You know, how do we get them access to employers? How do we educate the employers about the tremendous assets that we have within the refugee community and the Asian community? We also look at how do we ensure that we help parents navigate school systems and selecting schools that honors and celebrates and also creates opportunities for parents to be involved and engaged at parent conferences or, you know, to be fully a part of their child's learning. So there's a lot of things that we do in the housing, and because housing is important. When families don't have a roof over their heads, it's really hard for them to look for a job. You know, it's really hard for them to think about other stuff. So it's really looking at how do we also address homelessness, how do we address stabilization in terms of housing, and then how do we address, you know, transportation needs, because transportation is a huge barrier, particularly among emerging refugees. So if we wanted them to go look for a job, if we want them to get to work, we have to figure out how we can also remove transportation barriers. And so you could say that we provide really comprehensive services to the community that we serve. And we served about 15,000 community members on an annual basis with a really strong focus in Ramsey County and then also in Vanderwert County.
That's a lot to get started with. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. So to sort of take some of these contexts and kind of map them onto broader conversations or realities about poverty in St. Paul. One thing that was sort of emerged as a theme in the book $2 a Day, which is our common read, is this balance between data and personal stories, and also how important that sort of community or public narratives or representations of folks in poverty are in terms of informing the public conversation. So for the next couple questions, I want you to dig in from that lens, if that's okay. So in terms of that, what would you say, and whoever would like to go first is fine, what would you say are some of the common misconceptions about people living in poverty in St. Paul or Ramsey County or Hennepin County, but you know, close to home here near Hemlock?
Well, since I hold the mic, I better go. Well, I can, I can speak more about the community that I serve or represent as Hmong American Partnership, and then maybe more in general terms. But one of the misconceptions that people have about the Asian community is overcoming the Asian model minority myth. And then the perception is that all Asians are doing well. You know, we're educated, we're hard workers, we have high-paying jobs, and we don't have any issues. And so it's really overcoming that Asian model minority myth. So that's one of the misconceptions. Again, when you look at the Asian data, whether it's here in Minnesota or nationally, when you don't desegregate the data, it looks like all Asians are doing very, very well. So, then when you started peeling the onions and started desegregating the data, there's over 50 ethnic, groups within the Asian community. And so when you start desegregating the data, you started to really see big problems and issues. So here in Minnesota, the other hat that I also wear is that I'm the CEO of Hmong National Development, which is also another organization that focuses on research, data, technical assistance, capacity building, and policy work in Washington, D.C. And so on an annual basis, we produce not an annual basis, but twice within a 10-year span, we produce a State of the Hmong Community report. That looks at trends and really look at how our community is doing. And so when you look at that, within the 2010 report that we produced, 60% of our community is low income, and 30% of our community is in dire poverty. And if you look at education attainment, only 14% of our population is able to obtain higher education. And so, 40 years later, been here in the United States, that's a problem. So it tells me, and it tells our leaders, that it's actually not people who are foreign born, but grew up here and educated, like myself. I consider myself a 1.5 generation. But it is actually our 2.0 generation, our US born children, that are not making it, that are not graduating. And so when you talk about poverty, if this trend continues, it's going to be significant barriers and challenges, not only for the Hmong community, for the larger community. And so when we look at data like that, it's really looking at how do we then begin to have a broader conversation about how do you really address and attack education disparities. So I think that that's the one misconception that I sort of just expanded on. I think the other misconception is that, I've been in many tables in which they say, if you live above the poverty line, you're doing well, you're doing great. So how many of you, so a family of 4 makes about $24,000 a year and you're above the poverty line. So if you think about $24,000 a year and for a family of 4, and you think about rent, probably about $1,100 on a cheap side, right? And then plus utilities and food, this family has no disposable income, absolutely nothing. And yet, they are doing well. They're considered, not a family of poverty. And so I think that's another misconception, is that if you live above the poverty line, that you're fine. I think the other misconception is that people that are in poverty are lazy, and that's absolutely not true. I mean, there are many barriers and challenges. And so when we talk about equal opportunities, so, I often hear about, well, there's equal opportunities and people just don't want to access the opportunity. So equal opportunity does not translate into equity. There's a big difference between equal opportunity and equity. And we can spend all day on this, but I think my time's up, so I'll give my colleagues an opportunity.
Those are all good points. I think on a broader scale, there's a misconception that people make bad choices, and that's why that they're in the situation that they're in. And I think, people make a lot of assumptions that you made this bad choice and now you are in this scenario where maybe you're homeless or this, and this. But I think what people fail to recognize is there are definitely people in the US and around the world actually that don't have necessarily a safety net that can help support them. And so everybody makes mistakes, everybody makes bad choices. The difference between us and maybe a person in poverty is that we have people around us that can help support us, lift us up, give us a helping hand, and oftentimes people in poverty are those who simply do not have someone to give them that helping hand or support them in that scenario. So there's really no difference, but I think oftentimes we hear that it's a bad choice. People make this bad choice, and if only they would have made this bad choice, they would be so much better off. Not true. I think there's also a lot of stigma associated with our public programs. I'm very familiar with the SNAP program, worked a long time in trying to promote the program and the changes that have been made to really help people participate and apply for SNAP to help alleviate some of the pressures that they feel with their food scenario. And the story, I've done a lot of focus groups with people, and in particular seniors. You hear just really heartbreaking stories from seniors who say, I would like to apply, I really need the help, I don't have food, but my family really doesn't want me to apply. My family said if I apply, they won't, they'll disown me, they won't talk to me, they'll not support me. And so the idea of people feeling so strongly about someone applying for assistance to the detriment of that senior is really just a heartbreaking scenario, and I really think it just speaks to, I don't know if necessarily the media, public policy, and all the stories that are portrayed about people in poverty. And it really does impact people as they are going about their daily life and determining what should I do in order to get help. So that's what I see, I guess, when I'm going around the state and talking to different people who are struggling with, should I apply for this help? Should I go into this food shelf? What should I do in order to eat a basic human right, really?
Well, this is where I get to tell you what I heard just an hour ago from folks in the homeless shelter. And I said to them, what do you want me to tell folks? And they said, the first one, and they all agreed, is we're not stupid and we aren't lazy. And that is true. And then they talked about accessing services and how complicated they are. So they're not lazy because they have to work with 4 different caseworkers. Every few months they have to get reauthorized for any of their services. They can get a job, but then childcare may not kick in for 3 months, and so they struggle with trying to find care for their kids. And then they talked about health and accessing health care and how difficult that is, how their health care, their public programs kind of come and go, and if their kids need something when they're off the public program, then their bills mount, and yet they have to care for their kids. So that is I think it's a misconception that and they said once you get into poverty, it is really hard to get out because of all the rules and all of the hoops you have to jump through just to stay alive for a while. The other misconception, I worked in Head Start for 25 years, and I think a lot of people think people in poverty are single moms with kids, and that they are getting the support because they have their kids. Well, that is not true. Half of the families in Head Start, and the data will tell you that half of the families are really 2-parent families, and they're both probably working and are not making enough money to get those bills paid. I think you can also, I think that most of the people in Minnesota who are poor are people of color, and that is also not true. I think about half of them are in the deep poverty. So that's there are a lot of misconceptions about people's motivations and I think misconceptions about how much help we're providing as a society. We really do this much just to keep them alive, and we don't really get them over the hump so they can be self-sufficient. So lots of work needs to be done on our values as a society around our people living in poverty.
So there's a few myths that one of my coworkers wrote up an article about, and was some myths about poverty, and I just wanted to share some of these. It's about Minnesota in general, and then after that I'll share about a few personal experiences that I've seen, myths that in my head that had to be broken. So one of the myths is that Minnesota's economy has fully recovered since 2007 and poverty rates are back down to pre-recession levels. It's not true. Yes, the number of jobs has recovered. It's been about 9 years and the number of jobs has recovered, but the poverty rate is still lower than it was before the recession, from like 9.5% to it's still at 10.2%. So we're getting there. It's actually one of the cool things about this year's information that came out from the census is that poverty in pretty much every area, every demographic has gone down in the last year, which is great. We'll see if it continues. Hopefully, it continues that way. But yeah, but there's still work to be done. Another myth is that there are racial disparities here in Minnesota, but they're not nearly as bad as elsewhere in the nation. In fact, Minnesota is home to some of the worst racial disparities in the nation. The poverty rate is higher for people of color here in Minnesota than the rest of the U.S., and the poverty rate is lower for white non-Hispanic folks here in Minnesota compared to the rest of the U.S. So the gap between that is large. So again, lots of work to do. Myth number 3, which is kind of mentioned already, but most single mothers live in poverty. The idea that if you're a single mother, then you're definitely going to, or you're most likely going to be in poverty. It's not true. In fact, most single mothers do not live in poverty. However, it's still, 36% of families headed by single mothers live in poverty. So it's still a very large percentage, larger than some of the other demographics for families. Another myth is that no one is poor in the suburbs. The suburban poor, the number of people who are poor in the suburbs outnumbers those in St. Paul and Minneapolis combined. So just more people live in the suburbs. The rate is lower, but there's still more people. So to say that only poor people live in the cities is not correct. Let's see. Oh, and beyond that, the rest of the 80 counties in the state, there's even more people who live in poverty outside of the Twin Cities region than there is in the Twin Cities region. So think of poverty as not just in one place. It can be all over. It is all over. Another myth, Minnesotans wouldn't allow people with disabilities to live in poverty, right? If you have a disability, you should be supported and not have to live in poverty. But in fact, the poverty rates are twice as high for those with disabilities as they are for those without, about 19% versus 9%. And then the last myth I'll share is that between college debt and a changing job market, a bachelor's degree no longer pays, right? Which is not a myth you want to hear if you're here in college and paying a lot of money for your education. In fact, that is a myth. For most Minnesotans, a college degree still pays, at least in terms of avoiding poverty. The poverty rate has remained relatively low, about 3%, or about below 4%, and right now it's at 3% for folks who have a bachelor's degree. However, during the recession, the poverty rate for those without a bachelor's degree rose sharply, and then again, now it's back down a little bit, but it's still at around 10%. So it's still pretty high. So a couple things that I experienced personally recently, well, 4 years ago, I have an apartment and I had extra rooms, and there was a family that needed a place to stay, and so they lived with me, and then they live in poverty. They don't have the income to, they don't have a large income. And one of the things that happened was one day the father in that family was saying that he had gotten a job interview, and he was very excited about it. He was really excited to get back to work and start working after a long time of not working. And after work, I came home and I said, "How'd it go?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't go." And the reason he didn't go is that he didn't have $2.75 in cash to pay for the bus to go to the job interview. And it was mind-blowing, because I thought, what, $2.35? Just call me. I have like $5 somewhere like laying around. I didn't even, I didn't think that would be something that would be a barrier. And another thing is, another family that I know, they don't have an internet connection at home, and she's applying for a bunch of CNA jobs, CNA jobs, to a caretaker for folks, and all the job applications are online now. And she didn't grow up in the age of using a computer, isn't very computer literate, doesn't need it for her job. She's great at her job, she's worked at it 10, 15 years in the past, but now to apply for the job needs an internet connection, needs to know how to use, needs to know how to use a computer. And so I've been able to help her with that, but just thinking about that barrier is big. And then another, just a simple one too, is that cell phones are big, right? You put your number on a job application. Well, a lot of the cheaper phone plans, if you're trying to save money and you see another cheaper phone plan, you might get that one, but you might not be able to keep the same number. And so a lot of the folks that I know that live in poverty change numbers constantly. And so someone calling for a job interview or a reference or something, and they can't get a hold of you, can cause a lot of problems. It's something I haven't dealt with because I've had consistent income, been able to keep the same number, and didn't ever think of that as a privilege in a way.
Well, kind of extending from all of these misconceptions, with all of these in mind, how do you think, and we can cast this even broader than just the public conversation, but in what ways could the public conversation about poverty here in St. Paul, across the state, across the country, be improved? Or if you wanted to extend that to sort of conversations around public policy, or even to some extent conversations about publicness in general, in terms of what are public shared resources that we invest in. I think that's a term that maybe means something a little bit different now than maybe it did even a couple decades ago. So thoughts about how do we improve conversations about what to do collectively about the problem of poverty. And we'll start with you. We'll go the other way. This is working well.
Sure. The first thing you can do is come to a panel when we talk about poverty, so you can learn things and take it with you wherever you're going.
We're done now.
So kudos. You're doing well. I think one thing just to remember is poverty is not new. It's been around. It's been studied. We've been collecting information about it. There have been initiatives that have happened that have worked or not worked, and so really doing your research, going back, because I work at all the research, do your research, find out what's going on, what has worked, what hasn't. There's a lot of resources out there. I think one of the things that was mentioned is with data, is data disaggregation, the idea that, for example, I work a lot with the census, but the census gives you some information, but not all the information you need. So advocacy groups that can try to get more disaggregated data, whether that's by race or ethnicity or whatever, that can be more specific and more usable, is really important. What else? Thinking about, and this was mentioned already as well, what is the level of poverty, and can that change, and should it change? Those are things that in the future are going to be looked back at again. And you all are going to be part of that conversation someday, whether it's voting on it or talking to legislators about what the poverty level should be. And then I think that's all I want to say right now.
Well, I think we definitely need the conversation. I think we have pockets in our community, pockets around who don't even believe that there is poverty, that they have no idea what it is. And I think we need to start talking about who we are as a people, and educating folks who live in those homogenous little communities where everyone has lots of resources, and they have lots of privileges because of that. And so talking more about being all part of the same world and having some responsibilities to each other, I think are really important. I think our discourse in this country has taken a deep dive around judging other people and blaming other people for what situations they're in, and that isn't it isn't very accurate because it could be any of us. And so having leadership and people who are going to start advocating for our folks who are struggling, like so many of ours are, is really important. And I think, you know, I'm really about kids, and our schools are struggling in this state. We have really, our funding right now is less than 2003 funding for schools. Every school in the state is starting to cut because our kids have more needs and because we have less money. And that is going to impact the data around poverty and around how everybody else does. So we need to start talking about what kind of world we want to live in, what kind of world do we want our kids to live in, and what do we want them to be as adults, and start working toward a populace that thinks about the common good in what decisions they make. That was a little sermon, sorry.
So a couple things. I think one, you know, in looking at data, I think it's really important to recognize the nuances, and that's been touched upon. I think the recent census data came out this week or last week, a couple weeks ago, all blends together, this fall. And on the face of it, it looks like Minnesota's doing really well. And as was mentioned, you know, when you start to peel apart the onion a little bit and you start to look at different segments of our population, you see that in fact there are large segments of our population that are not doing well, that are either increasing in poverty or having really large disparities. So I think that's the important piece. Is poverty it's so broad, it touches on everything. There's not one solution. And it's really, and just to not take it at face value, I guess. It's all connected. I think, you know, when you think about if someone, I think one of the #1 reasons that people fall into bankruptcy is because of a healthcare crisis. And so that's part of the poverty conversation. So healthcare is part of the conversation, housing is part of the conversation, food, school, there's just the whole entire, you know, life experience of people. When one of those pieces fail, that puts you at risk for poverty. And so when we look at solutions and we will look at ways that we can, you know, help decrease poverty, it's just not the education system, it's just not government, it's just not faith-based organizations, it's really the larger component, it's a larger societal conversation and problem that needs to be addressed. So that would, I guess, be my caution and parting thought, is just to really be thoughtful about the whole entire system really needs to be thought of in terms of addressing poverty.
Well, I think this question is very, very interesting, right? Because I think that this question has to do with our internal reflection of, you know, what does this question mean to us? From the place of, you know, privilege, you know, from the place of someone who's actually gone through, you know, poverty ourselves and, you know, struggling to make ends meet. And I think that I'm just really excited by the fact that you're here. You are here, you are the ambassador, you are the next generation of leaders. You know, when you think about the state of Minnesota and the changing demographics, you probably see, you know, information or articles out there that says by 2020, that people of color are going to be the majority, right? So instead of the minority. And as you think about some of the issues and challenges that our state is facing, for example, by 2020, there's a deep report that says there's going to be a flat labor force growth. Thank goodness you guys are graduating. There's a ton of jobs for you, right? But at the same time, when you talk about poverty, while the state is producing these reports that says there's going to be a flat zero labor force growth by 2020 because of the boomers are retiring, you know, and it's going to continue to decline, right? And before it spike up again. Well, at the same time, when you talk about equity and you talk about equal opportunities, they all don't mean the same. And so I work for a community where we have tremendous assets, because we have a lot of people that are ready to work. But the barriers that we have are enormous. We have people that are not ready to enter a 2-year, college or 4-year college. We have people that are reading as a grade, a level 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? And so as we talk about poverty, is really what then are the investments that we're going to make in the community? In terms of education, in terms of custom jobs trainings, in terms of really looking at what are the unique needs of the different population that live in our city or state, and what are we willing to do? And so we can't have a conversation about poverty if we're not willing to have a conversation about institutional racism, if we're not willing to have a conversation about privilege, if we're not willing to have a conversation about our own biases, and if we're not willing to have a conversation about doing things differently. And so, we always want to do things the same because that's our comfort zone. That's how we know how to do it, regardless of the fact that it produces the same result every year, right? So I think when I think about poverty is you have to look at what are we willing to do. And it's beyond me, it's beyond this room here. But where do we start? How do we start? How do we build ambassadors like you here? Who is willing to step outside your comfort zone to really come and listen to a session like this, to expand your horizon, to learn about the barriers and challenges and disparities and needs and issues so that you can become a better ambassador, so that you can become a better leader, so that you can also enrich other people's lives, so that you can also raise awareness for those that aren't in this room. So it starts with one person. How do we multiply that? So that we can create a huge campaign to attack poverty. So the war on poverty. You may have seen some of the taglines out there. And so as I think about earlier when I give you the statistics about the low graduation rate from college for the Hmong community, and as I think about the deep report that says by 2020, the number of jobs that are going to be available to those that have less than a high school diploma is going to decrease by more than 60%. And those that have a high school diploma, the number of jobs are still going to be decreased by 50% or more. And then the number of jobs that are going to be available to people that have AA degree or bachelor's or master's or PhDs is going to increase. So then if that's the trend, we're in a global era, right? All your kids grow up with technologies and you're able to communicate globally. So that means that how do we ensure that America is a competitive country? When any company can go anywhere to hire labor, right? And so if you look at all these trends and you look at the poverty that we have, education is at the core of it. But how do we not bankrupt our students, in that process? So I love to continue to, have these kind of conversations because I believe that it is people like you in this room here that are going to be able to make a difference and are going to be able to expand the conversation in a different way. So just thank you for the opportunity.
Well, that's a great note on which to throw it open for a question from all of you very important people, right? Future leaders in the audience. Are there any questions for individual members of the panel or the panel in general? Yeah, go ahead.
How do we get we're recording, so I can capture here. How do we get involved with people like you and giving back to the community in ways that we
How do we get involved with people like you? Wonderful people like you. That's a good question.
Well, with business cards, I would imagine. But beyond that, I think there's a couple different ways. If you think about service and working with people in poverty, volunteering, mentoring, that sort of thing. I think it's really important to think about ways, not going into, if you want to learn more about people in poverty and ways that maybe you can impact policy or programs, etc. I think it's really important to not go into a scenario where you're thinking, how can I help somebody? it's just so demeaning in so many ways. But really to think about how can I learn and how can I increase my knowledge so that I can do better in the sphere that I choose. We mentioned sort of this really broad, poverty covers so many things. So really, whatever your interest is, you can find, I think, a link to poverty. Within the Department of Human Services, we have an Executive Pathways program, an internship program, and so I think I can certainly share that information. There's also a Star of the North Fellow program that's with I think all state departments. So I think there's opportunities to connect no matter where you are in your area of study, whether you're in college or you're actually just finishing college. There's opportunities to dabble, to see is this sort of the work that you're interested in. So that's one piece. The other piece I just want to throw out too is we always talk about, when I work with community action agencies, we always talk about the importance of the people that are working in this arena to be the voice for people that don't have the voice or cannot be the voice for themselves. So when people are in poverty, they are struggling. They're struggling to find food, to find shelter, to just maintain the daily, day-to-day existence. And they don't necessarily have the opportunity to go out and vote and to ask the hard questions. So what I think all of you can do is really ask your elected officials, people who are campaigning for elected office, what are they doing for people in poverty? And then vote based on that.
Yeah, I think voting is huge because we need leadership who is compassionate and understands that we are in this together, and that when we raise votes, we raise all voices. So I think I want to just reemphasize your point that when you're working with people in poverty, to come alongside them, not as and take their lead and be there as supports. You're not there to save them. They know how to save themselves. They just need a little help getting there. One of the other things I think is important is to study and read and learn about the impact of poverty in our country. I think when you're educated, you can talk about what is this costing us, that we have people who are not reaching their full potential, that are not able to contribute the way we need them to be. And so what does that cost in terms of prison and healthcare and education and mental health services and all those things? Know what having people in poverty means to the rest of us, and then you can bring that to a party and talk about it, or take it to the doors when you're out helping with campaigns. But making that a huge issue, it impacts all of us, and making sure people know that there are opportunities to volunteer. Head Start, I know, would take folks if you wanted to work with young kids. They will impress you with their capacity to learn and how capable they really are. And I couldn't be the tooth fairy if I didn't offer this. We have some wonderful oral health materials, and helping us educate kids and families is something that you certainly could do, and I could help you with that. That's easy.
So on a personal level, so I work a lot with data at work, and it's great. I love it. It sets a foundation for people to take action. But if that was all I did all day, that wouldn't be enough for me. So one of the things that I personally try to do in my life is try to surround myself with people who are different from me. It's very easy to surround yourself with cookie cutter versions of yourself. So whether that's, and one of the ways is surrounding yourself with people of all income brackets, right? Your friend group, where you live, where your neighborhood, your community. One of the things that really changed me deeply was, it actually is a Wilder program, but it's the Neighborhood Leadership Program. And it looked at how, as members of a community, and living in a neighborhood, what is our impact? How can we make an impact no matter whether we have an official role or not? We are people who live there, and we do support that community and can make a difference in those areas. And met some wonderful people all across St. Paul through that program as well, people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. And then the other thing too is whether if you are someone who grew up in poverty, sharing your story with those around you to, as you're able, that can really open people's eyes about living in poverty, because maybe it's something that is not assumed. And then another thing is if you are someone who doesn't worry about some larger big things, like for example if you needed $500 for an emergency, if that's something that you already know you could call home, or you have money in the bank, or you have this and it wouldn't be an issue, remember that that's not the case for everyone. And for someone else, that $500 emergency could be the tipping point. So make sure, so one thing I've tried to do in my life personally is try to think about like the money that I earn and whether that's really my money. Like, how does that become my money just because I somehow was privileged enough to have a job where I could make a certain amount of money and live the comfortable life that I wanted, but is that my money? Someone else is working just as hard for less, or not able to get a job even though they have just as many talents. So how do we share and spread the wealth? I think is a really important thing that I had to look at myself and figure out how I felt about it and how I was going to make a difference personally. I also studied education in college. That was my degree. I love the children. And so I think one of the things to think about is as you're here in college, you didn't just get here accidentally. You worked in high school and you were successful in high school, and then you got here. And then before that, you were successful in junior high to get yourself to high school. And before that, elementary school. And before that, you had the tools to learn, to read, to have models in your life that helped you since you were an infant. And so thinking about the whole continuum, so wherever you want to fit in on that, whether it's helping out from early childhood all the way to young adults, or even helping your peers here in college to succeed, it makes a huge difference. If you can help each other get to that end goal of getting that degree, we've already shown that that's a huge determinant to success and not getting into poverty.
That is an excellent question. How do you get involved? Make sure you talk to me afterwards so I can write your name down. I mean, there are many different ways that you can get involved, right? At our organization, we do a lot of policy work. We do a lot of voter registration, voter education, voter turnout. We do canvassing, calling, busing people, to the poll. There's a number of things that we can do. We also have a number of internship opportunities with our adult basic education program. The students there are so anxious to practice the English skills with a native speaker, and also we have our education in the school program by tutoring kids as well. So I know that I'm out of time, I got the signal already, but there's so much that you can be involved in. And so don't hesitate to reach out. And the fact that you even asked the question, says a lot about your readiness to expand beyond your horizon and really to enrich your own experience. And, I think when you're out there in the community, it gives you a different experience and perspective than just hearing from us. I cannot even begin to tell you the kind of experience that you're going to get when you're actually in the classroom working with either adult basic education students or tutoring, kids that are struggling, or being out there and helping to kind of navigate or build resources for the community, or being an ambassador and showing up and organizing listening sessions to talk about poverty. So I think there's many, many things that you guys can do, and I would say, there's plenty of organizations that are in need of, young, talented leaders such as yourself. Organizations that are ethnic specific, have a lot of lack of infrastructure and capacity themselves. So they're looking for talent, people to help them with the website, communications, anything that you guys are majoring, I'm pretty sure that there are people out there that can use your expertise and, you know, use your talent as well. So I'd say, you know, please get out there and reach out. There's a lot of work to be done.
Well, I think those are there any other closing thoughts that anyone would like to share?
I just have a very quick one. I was just talking to one of my coworkers before I came here, and she takes care of our social media on Minnesota Compass. So here's just a quick little thing that you could do if you ever need help and you want some data on some important thing in Minnesota, poverty or other measures. You can tweet at us and we will respond very quickly. So if you ever have like oh crap, I have a class in an hour and I need to know this information, just tweet it to us and we'll try to help you out. So it's free.
Where do they tweet? What's the handle?
Oh, it's Minnesota Compass. It's on the brochure somewhere. So you'll find it.
Yes, Mary has.
I would be negligent if I didn't mention that Hamlin University has a collaboration with the Hamlin Elementary School across the street. So that's a very diverse school. Lots of kids come from low-income families. So if you are inclined, please volunteer over there. It's a great experience.
Yeah, and if you want more information about that, that's just right upstairs in the Wesley Center. Nancy Vang coordinates that program. I think this was a really wonderful conversation. I think one thing that came through with me is Egan and Schaefer, Kathy Egan and Luke Schaefer class, we've talked a lot about the value of relationships and relationship building, and I think that came across strongly in this conversation as well. And I also, this concept, I think it was at the University of Minnesota, I think at Cura, they had these great buttons that folks who did community engagement work would wear that just said with. So shifting this concept of rather than thinking about how do I do something for someone else, or how do I do something to help someone else, or I suppose in some not great case, how do I do something to someone else, but thinking about this framework of with, how do we do things with each other, learn from each other, and be in conversation with each other, I think came across really strongly. So I just wanted to thank all of these fantastic panelists for joining us today, and thank you all. We give them a round of applause. I was remiss in saying at the church last Thursday during Commitment to Community is to remind you that Minnesota is a same-day voter registration state, so there's no excuse not to vote. I almost said that to everyone, but you all get this message now, so I feel a little bit better about myself. So yes, there is a voter registration deadline, but you can register same day. See your lovely colleagues from MPERT with more information about that. One more event in the Common Read series, the screening of the documentary Poor Kids will be taking place on October 18th. I believe we might be in the combined room, but we're on this floor of Anderson 111 or 112. Oh, Molly.
There's going to be rebroadcast of Commitment to Community, so if you didn't get a chance to see it, or you know someone who didn't get a chance to see it, there will be other opportunities.
So will that be Inside Hamlin?
Yes.
So check Inside Hamlin too if you'd like to see a rebroadcast of Commitment to Community. So thank you all so much, and thanks again to our wonderful panel. Have a great day.